The Grimmer family. January 12, 1970 was meant to be a typical day for the Grimmer family. Originally from Bristol, England, they had made the life-altering choice to move to Australia 2 years earlier. They had settled in Illawarra, New South Wales at the Fairy Meadow Migrant Hostel, where the family consisted of 26-year-old Carol, 24-year-old Vince, 7-year-old Ricky, 5-year-old Stephen, 4-year-old Paul, and 3-year-old Cheryl. On January 12th, the Grimmers planned a visit to the nearby Fairy Meadow Beach. The only family member missing from the trip was Vince, who was working as a combat engineer for the Australian Army and couldn't join them. While the children played under the warm summer sun, the weather suddenly changed in the afternoon around 2 p.m. as winds picked up, shifting direction and blowing sand everywhere. At this point, Carol decided it was time to leave and started gathering their things. She instructed the children to wash off together in the shower block before they headed home. However, 10 minutes later, Ricky, the oldest child, approached his mother and explained that 3-year-old Cheryl was refusing to leave the shower block. Carol quickly followed Ricky back to the showers but found Cheryl was no longer there. Growing increasingly worried, the mother of 4 ran to a nearby house and asked the residents to call the police. Around this time, witnesses reported seeing a man carrying a girl they believed to be Cheryl. They recalled him holding the toddler up to drink from a water fountain before fleeing the scene, with Cheryl wrapped in a towel. It's now believed that the witnesses may have been mistaken in their recollection. Ricky later told police that he had picked up his younger sister so she could drink from the fountain. It's thought that the witnesses had seen this but mistook Ricky for an older man. Other reports at the time mentioned seeing Cheryl in a white car. New South Wales police arrived quickly, and the disappearance of the toddler triggered an extensive search. After 24 hours, authorities had formulated 4 theories regarding Cheryl's possible whereabouts. When announcing their findings to the press, the police shared that they believed there were several possibilities. Cheryl could have hidden herself somewhere and fallen asleep. She might have wandered into the ocean and been swept away. She could have fallen into a waterway, or she might have been taken by someone with malicious intent. Another 24 hours passed without any trace of the missing 3-year-old. Given the extensive search efforts, if Cheryl had experienced an accident or simply hidden herself, she would likely have been found by now. The absence of any sign of her led investigators to rule out the first 3 theories. Cheryl's disappearance was now being treated as a potential crime. Someone had taken her, and the challenge was now to figure out who. With several leads in hand, the police began their investigation into the individual responsible for Cheryl's abduction. Among the leads they pursued was a reported sighting of a blue Volkswagen Type 2 near the beach around the time of the disappearance. 3 days after Cheryl went missing, the police received a ransom letter, which they believed to be legitimate. The note writer demanded that they be given $10,000 in exchange for Cheryl's safe return. They noted that the 3-year-old was currently unharmed. Investigators got to work setting up a drop in the Wollongong suburb of Bully, placing officers dressed as council workers nearby. The money was dropped off, but the letter writer never collected the cash. It was initially feared that the large-scale police operation and the carefully placed undercover officers had spooked the perpetrator. But as the letter writer never made contact with the authorities again, it was assumed that the ransom demand was a hoax. By 1971, had still not been found, and the police had established 3 main suspects in the case, although none could be definitively identified as the man witnesses had seen on the day of the disappearance. 15 months after Cheryl went missing, a local teenager handed himself over to New South Wales police. The 17-year-old from Victoria claimed that he had abducted and taken the life of the toddler. He reportedly gave an overview of the events on January. The teenager provided a detailed description of the area where Cheryl was allegedly buried, mentioning tubular steel gates, a cattle guard, a track, and a small creek, which were all close to where her body was supposedly found. According to an article in the Illawarra Mercury, several pieces of information the teenager provided were specific details about the crime that only the person responsible could have known. He accurately described the blue swimsuit Cheryl was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with the white towels she had with her. The teenager also outlined the route he had taken from the beach to the Balgownie area. where he claimed to have buried her body. He even took detectives to the location, although it was under development for housing at the time. He allegedly told the police, "I think this is it, but it's all changed." However, when the police interviewed the property owner, his description was contradicted. The owner pointed out that the cattle guard had been installed recently, and it had not been there at the time of Cheryl's disappearance. He also noted that there had never been a tubular gate in the area. The discrepancies in the teenager's account led investigators to conclude that his confession was likely false. A police report written by Detective Sergeant Philip Finley stated that, without material evidence directly linking the teenager to the missing child, it would not be appropriate to take any further action at that time. Despite the efforts of police, which included several public appeals and the offering of a $5,000 reward, no trace of Cheryl Grimmer was ever found and her case began to grow cold. Her family, in the meantime, decided to move back to the UK. The tragic story of their daughter's disappearance was nationwide and a public spectacle, and they struggled to live normally in Australia as they no longer had the anonymity they once did. For years, Cheryl's case lay dormant. The past, and then came the all without progress on the case. It wasn't until the case began to receive some media attention again when New South Wales Police Minister Mike Gallagher stated that while it was possible the 3-year-old and the culprit were both dead at this point, he hoped that someone might know the truth and might come forward with that information. He also speculated that the little girl had been alive for the last several decades without knowing her true identity. He encouraged anyone with questions about their past who may suspect they are the Grimmer's daughter to come forward. In February 2000, such woman came forward, but a DNA test proved she was not the missing toddler. In February, a coroner formally ruled that Cheryl was deceased, having passed away shortly after her disappearance. The cause of death was noted as being undetermined, and the coroner recommended that the New South Wales police reopen the investigation. Carol Grimmer noted her belief that her daughter was still alive, stating, "It's not just a mother's hope, it's annoying." Taking on board the coroner's advice, the police put forward a $100,000 reward for information regarding the case. Afterwards, Wollongong detectives and the Homicide Squad's Unsolved homicide team combined into a new task force called Strike Force Wessel. In February 2016, a review of the evidence was carried out. Every detail was put into the police computer system for the first time, and fresh eyes on the case revealed that many leads had not been thoroughly followed by investigators back in 1970. Felt that the 1971 confession in particular had been dismissed too easily. Armed with this information, they made their way back to the property where the 17-year-old had claimed to have carried out the murder. Here, detectives questioned the landowner's son, who in fact contradicted everything his father had stated previously. He claimed that the cattle guard was certainly in place and that the tubular gate had been there too. There was also a track leading to a creek on the land. All of these details had been mentioned by the 17-year-old in his original statement. It is unclear why the property owner countered all of these claims in 1971. Later that year, it was revealed that 3 witnesses from 1970 had come forward after they recalled seeing a male teenager loitering around the shower block where Cheryl had gone missing. The police also announced they had a credible lead on a man who was spotted with a fair-haired child in his arms at the time of the disappearance. The man would be in his 60s, and they asked him to come forward and began examining the Mounts Penang training school for boys. They believed that their prime suspect had spent time attending the reformatory school during the indicated that they had been provided with this information by someone who believed the former staff or students would be able to shed light on their inquiry. Then it appeared that the case had finally been cracked. The police announced on March 23rd that a man had been arrested in Frankston, a suburb of Melbourne, at 1 p.m, on that he was currently being extradited from Victoria. The individual, whose name has been kept out of the public, was charged at Wollongong Police Station with Cheryl's abduction and subsequent murder, and then imprisoned at the Silverwater Correctional Complex. Investigators noted that it was unlikely Cheryl's body would ever be recovered due to the fact that much development had occurred over the years since her death. 1 month later, the police announced that they were trying to trace a family who gave a witness statement on the day of the abduction. Shortly after the toddler went missing, the family moved to Papua New Guinea, then back to their native Nottinghamshire in England. Interpol assisted in tracing the family, and they were eventually located. Their testimonies were believed to be highly important in the court case. Yet another month passed, and in May 0, it was revealed that the suspect in custody was the same person who, as a 17-year-old, had confessed to the slayings back in 1971. At the time, his admittance had been dismissed due to inconsistencies, but investigators had now dispelled those inconsistencies. The accused was currently 63 years old, but was around 16 at the time of the murder, making him a minor. It is for this reason his name has never been disclosed. The individual had been born in the UK like Cheryl and had moved to Australia during this time. More information about the man's confession was revealed, and it was chillingly noted that he had told doctors in 1970 that he had urges to kill himself and kill other people. In his 1971 admission, the suspect claimed that he'd hidden with Cheryl in a nearby drain for about 35 minutes after he had taken her. He gagged her with a handkerchief and tied her hands behind her back. Emerging from the drain, he walked around 1.8 miles with the toddler to Balgony. According to the case prosecutor, the suspect intended on sexually assaulting Cheryl, although the 63-year-old would later deny this claim, labeling it as bullshit. In his confession, he told the police that he had removed the gag from Cheryl's mouth, but that she'd started to scream and ignored him when he told her to shut up. He quickly put his hands around her neck and strangled her to death in a bid to get her to be quiet. Afterwards, he panicked, removed her clothes, and placed bushes and dirt over her body before he returned to Fairy Meadow Beach. Later, the suspect sought bail. Prosecutors were opposed to this, claiming he was a flight risk as he was not an Australian citizen and still possessed a British passport. The prosecution noted the evidence against the 63-year-old was strong, stating he said that he'd been staying at the time in a Sydney hostel and caught the train to Fairy Meadow that morning and hung out at the beach. He then provided significant details in relation to the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Cheryl, details of which are confirmed by eyewitness accounts and details which the prosecution says could only be known to the offender. Meanwhile, the suspect's lawyer, Laura Fennell, said that it would be argued at trial that her client was significantly mentally unwell at the time of his 1971 confession, rendering his admittance inadmissible. She added that the case was already troublingly weak and that in that he had also admitted to the slaying of a prison guard, but this was found to be untrue. Ultimately, Magistrate Michael Stoddard refused bail, stating, "In my interview, on the face of it, there's a strong case against the accused in relation to the charge of murder." He noted that there were no bail conditions that could lessen the risk he posed if he was released. The suspect appeared at the Supreme Court of New South Wales on September 7, 2018 via a video link. He confirmed his name, entered a not guilty plea, and said nothing further. His trial was due to begin on Friday, February 15, 2019. However, a judge ruled that a key part of the prosecution's case could not be used as evidence in the trial, the evidence being the suspect's 1971 confession. The admittance couldn't be used as the suspect was a minor at the time and did not have an adult representative present during the police interview. And even though this wasn't legally necessary in the rule that the interview should be excluded on the basis of unfairness. He also referenced testimony from psychologists who'd reviewed the case for trial and noted that the 63-year-old had low intellect and would be more vulnerable to influence at the time. As this evidence was crucial to the case, the prosecution felt they were unable to continue forward. The man was released and his case has remained dormant since. Carol and Vince Grimmer passed away shortly after the case was reopened but Cheryl's brothers, Ricky and Stephen, have expressed their surprise and distress at the outcome of recent events. Ricky Nash told reporters, "We're just a bit numb, a bit shocked. No words can describe how I feel at the moment." In February 2016, Stephen Grimmer shared his deep sense of loss, saying, "My mom and dad have passed on not knowing, and we want to know too before we pass on." Ricky, the eldest of the Grimmer brothers, seems to have been most affected by Cheryl's disappearance, revealing, "The decisions I made on the day were wrong. It's been with me all my life. I just want it over with. I shouldn't have left." He added, "Everyone says it's not your fault. Come and stand where I'm standing. See what it feels like." Ricky also expressed a desire to know where his sister's remains were, stating, "Give us something that we can go and mourn." Cheryl Jean Grimmer was last seen at the shower block on Fairy Meadow Beach, New South Wales, on January 12, 1970. At just 3 years old, She stood 3 feet tall, with blonde hair and blue eyes. A distinguishing feature of Cheryl was a navel that protruded 1 centimeter due to a medical condition. On the day of her disappearance, she was wearing a royal blue swimming suit with net paneling and carrying a white towel. A $1 million reward is currently being offered for information regarding her case. If you have any details, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 33,000. Moving on to the next case. Joy Hibbs. On April 19, 1991, around 1 p.m., David Hibbs returned home from school, eager to share the news that he had made the honor roll. However, upon approaching his house in Corydon, Pennsylvania, he noticed smoke billowing from the windows. He rushed to the back kitchen door, but heavy smoke prevented him from entering. As he observed the scene, he noticed the gas stove burners were all lit, which led him to believe that his mother, Joy Hibbs, had been cooking and perhaps forgotten to turn off the stove. In panic, David called out for help, and his neighbors, who were working nearby, heard him. They attempted to enter the house to find Joy, but the fire was too intense. They immediately called the fire department. Despite their efforts to control the blaze with a garden hose, the fire continued to rage until firefighters arrived. After what seemed like an eternity, the fire was finally extinguished. Tragically, a paramedic informed 10-year-old David that his mother had not survived. Firefighters discovered Joy's body in David's bedroom, where she had been brutally assaulted. She had been so badly burned that she was unrecognizable. While the initial belief was that Joy had died in an accidental fire, an autopsy revealed a chilling truth. There was no sign that Joy had inhaled smoke, suggesting she had already been dead before the fire started. Further investigation uncovered that she had been violently attacked, strangled with wire cords, and stabbed 5 times in the chest and neck. The fire, it seemed, had been deliberately set to destroy evidence. This was a clever cover-up approach by the killer, given that the house had been completely destroyed from the fire, and that the neighbors had destroyed important evidence while attempting to put out the fire. According to the findings of the fire marshal's investigation, the fire originated from 4 different locations in the home, 2 in the kitchen, 1 in David's bedroom, and 1 in the corridor. According to the investigators, the morning of her death, Joy had cashed her paycheck. Her purse's contents were tossed on the living room floor, and the police found her wallet stuffed under the couch. The absence of evidence was compounded by the difficulty the investigators experienced in determining a motive. Joy was adored by all, worked part-time as a medical assistant, and was committed to her family. David Hibbs described his mother as graceful, polite, and easygoing. Authorities had no leads whatsoever as to the person who would want to kill her. On the day she was killed, Joy had dropped her 2 kids off at school in the morning. She received her paycheck, ran a few errands, and got home shortly after 11 o'clock in the morning. A church pastor and another member of the congregation dropped by for a visit shortly after she returned home. Joy Hibbs had indicated a desire to celebrate Easter in the church. Just before noon, the pastor and a member of the church departed the Hibbs family house. According to eyewitnesses, there was a dark blue Monte Carlo parked across the Hibbs yard shortly after the church pastor and his member left. The car was said to have remained there until 1 p.m. 2 days after Joy Hibbs' murder, former Bristol County Police Chief Tommy Mills, who was also a narcotics detective, reached out to the residence of Robert Francis Atkins in Falls, Pennsylvania. Robert lived about 2 hours away from where Joy Hibbs lived. Joy and her husband would occasionally buy tiny amounts of marijuana from Robert Atkins, who also appeared to have been their former neighbor. Robert resisted letting the detectives into his house. In the driveway, Detective Tommy Mills spotted a dark-colored Monte Carlo that matched a witness's description of a similar vehicle parked carelessly outside Joy's house shortly before the neighborhood heard the fire. However, during further investigation, the witness said Robert Atkins' automobile wasn't the one they saw. Robert Atkins was invited to undergo a polygraph by the investigators, but he refused, explaining that he had damaged his arm and that his lawyer had instructed him to wait since the nerve damage would affect the polygraph results. He further disclosed that he was camping at the Poconos with his family, friends, and co-workers when Joy's murder took place. Detectives soon verified his alibi. Robert confirmed that he bought a little marijuana for the Hibbs, but he wasn't a dealer. In the weeks preceding his mother's murder, David Hibbs overheard her arguing with Robert Atkins on the phone over the most recent purchase of a baggie of marijuana. Because the baggie was packed with stems and seeds, Joy demanded her money back from Robert. When asked by the police, Robert confirmed these arguments. He, however, stated that he had informed Joy that he couldn't refund her the money. According to him, it was simply improper. Investigators couldn't understand how a few tiny baggies of marijuana could cause someone to die. The couple was only spending $20 to $40 on marijuana at a time, not enough to get the attention of major sellers. On April 27, 1991, a co-worker of April Atkins, the wife of Robert Atkins, came forward to say that on the day Joy Hibbs was murdered, she had called the Atkins residence between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m., and Robert Atkins had picked up the call. On hearing this, the police now thought Joy's murder took place between 11:50 and 12:50. The police turned their attention to Joy's private life after determining that Robert Atkins' alibi appeared to be flawless. They questioned Joy's relatives and friends and found nothing unusual. Except for the person who had killed Joy, no one seemed to harbor any wicked intentions for her. Robert Atkins was still a person of interest in the case despite having an alibi, though. 23 years after Joy was brutally murdered, a new Bristol Township detective, Michael Slaughter, was assigned the cold case in April 2014. Detective Slaughter made the decision to visit April Atkins, who claimed that she had never been questioned by authorities regarding the death of Joy Hibbs. She, however, clung to the narrative that her family was on vacation in the Poconos that weekend and hadn't learned of Joy's murder until they returned. A few days later, Detective Slaughter re-interrogated Robert Atkins regarding his movements at the time of Joy's death. He supported his wife's account of going camping and revealed to Slaughter that he had been a secret narcotics informant in 1991, doing drug deals and then reporting them to the police. During an interview with Slaughter in May 2014, a co-worker of Joy claimed that on the Monday before she was killed, a man called Joy at work and threatened to kill her. The co-worker decided not to report the call to the police because Joy's husband was now the focus of the investigation at the time. 2 years later, in September 2016, April Atkins, who is now divorced, traveled to the Bristol Township Police Station in order to provide a taped statement regarding her ex-husband's whereabouts during the murder of Joy Hibbs. Detective Slaughter was informed by April that Robert Atkins had returned home covered in blood after allegedly stabbing someone and setting their home on fire. He then instructed her to gather the children, take a few days off work, and travel to the Poconos in the north. Out of anxiety and fear, April remained silent. That day, Robert Atkins took a shower after washing his blood-stained clothing. April Atkins didn't learn about the murder of Joy Hibbs until after her family returned from a trip to the Poconos. Despite the revelation, the case remained inactive for another 5 years. That was until November 2021, when Bucks County Detective David Hanks tracked down a former co-worker of April Atkins from 1991. Initially, the co-worker denied knowing April. However, when subpoenaed by the district attorney to testify before a grand jury about a phone call she had made to the Atkins household, the co-worker changed her story. The call had been answered by Robert Atkins, who was supposed to be camping in the Poconos at the time. In the following month, Detective Hanks managed to record a conversation between Robert Atkins and his ex-wife, April. This conversation led Robert to believe that April had informed her roommate about his involvement in Joy Hibbs' murder, which caused his anger and anxiety to escalate. Further damning testimony came from Robert's son, who in April 2022 testified that his father had confessed to him in December that he expected to be arrested soon for something that had happened many years ago. Robert had mentioned a woman dying in a fire before later revealing that she had been stabbed. After 31 years of evading justice, Robert Atkins was arrested in May 2022. He is currently being held at the Bucks County Correctional Facility, facing multiple charges, including first-degree and second-degree murder, 7 counts of arson, 2 counts of robbery, and 7 counts of first-degree arson, all related to the tragic death of Joy Hibbs. Moving on to the next case. Krista Bramlett. In 1996, 23-year-old Krista Bramlett lived in New Providence, Tennessee. Struggling financially, she resided in a mobile home, while her 2 young children had moved to live with her mother in Corpus Christi, Texas. Krista remained behind, hoping to finish her GED program. However, the area surrounding her home had become increasingly unsafe, plagued by rising crime rates, including burglaries and drug-related offenses. Sadly, Krista became one of the many victims of the community's worsening troubles. On the afternoon of October 28, 1996, her landlord knocked on the door of her mobile home in Sunnydale Mobile Home Park, located just off Peachers Mill Road. When there was no answer, the landlord grew concerned and decided to check inside. It was there that he discovered Krista's body. She had sustained injuries to her throat, and the autopsy revealed that she had been suffocated. Additionally, it was determined that she had been indecently assaulted. Investigators collected male DNA from her body and sent it to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab to create a DNA profile. The DNA profile was submitted into the combined DNA index system, but no matches could be made. Investigators were only able to confirm that the DNA belonged to a black male. Without any other leads in the case, investigators could not identify the culprit, and the case went cold. It was only on February 13, 2019 that the Clarksville Police Department detective, Michael Urey, got the news he was waiting for. The DNA in the combined DNA index system matched a man who was living in Phoenix, Arizona. The man is 48-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth. Hudspeth had never come up in the investigation up to this point, and he was on nobody's radar. In February, Detective Urey interviewed Hudspeth and discovered that he was indeed in Clarksville at the time Krista's life was taken. He moved away from the area in December of 1997. Hudspeth admitted that he knew Krista and said he was the last person to see her alive. As a result of the DNA evidence and this interview, Hudspeth was arrested and charged in connection with the case. Investigators also took a look at Hudspeth's arrest record. They could see that he had been arrested several times on charges like domestic assault and felony assault. He has spent time in Arizona and Texas prisons. This brings up the question, why wasn't his DNA collected years ago? In June 2019, Hudspeth made his first appearance in Montgomery County Court in connection with the charges against him. The case went to trial in September 2021. During the trial, half of a 3-hour interview conducted by Detective Ullery with Hudspeth was shown to the jury. Hudspeth admitted that he had been using drugs at the time and could not recall whether he had assaulted or killed Krista, but he expressed hope that he had not done so. It was also revealed that Hudspeth's DNA was found on Krista's body, on her bra, and on 2 cigarette butts collected from the scene. After 4 days of testimony, Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty of all charges on September 11. In January 2022, at 51 years old, Hudspeth was sentenced to life in prison, with an additional 20 years for his crimes. Betsy Ertzmer. Betsy Ruth Ertzmer, born on July 11, 1926, in Holland, Michigan, was just 22 years old when her life was tragically cut short. The youngest of 4 children, Betsy initially studied English and art at the University of Michigan before transferring to Pennsylvania State University after graduation. Her long-term boyfriend, David Wright, was a medical school student at the same university. Reflecting on the loss of his girlfriend years later, David often wondered what might have happened if Betsy had stayed with him that weekend when she was murdered. David had planned to marry Betsy. On November 28, 1969, she was in the library working on a research paper when fellow students found her collapsed on the floor. Bystanders assumed she had suffered a seizure or fainted and began performing CPR. The campus hospital was alerted, and by 5:19 p.m., an ambulance took Betsy to the Rittenor Health Center, where she was pronounced dead shortly after. It wasn't until doctors examined her body that they discovered she had been stabbed once through the left breast. Betsy was wearing a red dress that concealed her blood, and she had bled into her lungs, leaving little blood around the wound. Investigators later concluded that she had probably been stabbed from behind, as there were no defensive injuries on her hands or arms. They theorized that Betsy was likely familiar with her killer and did not fear him. Reportedly, just minutes after the stabbing, One or two men left the library and told the clerk, "Somebody better help that girl." One witness claimed there was only one blind man. It's unknown whether it was one or two men, and in either case he or they remain unidentified. On the back of the murder, police began their investigation and held 5,000 interviews in the course of it. They made no arrests and pinned down few suspects. Nobody seemed to have a bad word to say about Betsy, and she was described as smart and good-natured and had no known enemies. Whilst David Wright, her boyfriend, was considered a person of interest initially, he was quickly ruled out when their good relationship was vouched for by those who knew the couple. And according to friends, he didn't leave the study group he was in on the day of the murder, providing him with a rock-solid alibi. Witnesses were few and far between in Betsy's case. Some reported hearing a scream, while others told of the sound of falling books or shelves, likely from when the student collapsed among the stacks in the library. Consequently, 3 drawings were released of witnesses that police couldn't track down. But unfortunately, these illustrations were highly generic, and it appears that the witnesses were never found. The murder weapon was also never recovered, leaving investigators with little to go on. To make matters worse, the murder scene had actually been cleaned up by a janitor after Betsy was taken to hospital, leaving police with even less to work with as any crime scene clues were now gone. Despite the lack of leads or information, police did eventually find several suspects. An early suspect in the case was a man named Robert Dirge, a 27-year-old English professor who died in a car crash in Michigan about 3 weeks after the murder. He was investigated and cleared, although it's unknown what drew him into the eye of the police as a person of interest in the first place. It was also briefly speculated that the infamous Ted Bundy was responsible for the killing, as he'd attended Temple University in Pennsylvania in 1969 and was a frequent visitor of university libraries. However, he was also ruled out. Another fleeting suspect was some kind of military man, given the precision of the wound. It was later theorized that perhaps Betsy had stumbled upon a gay couple or encounter and was killed so that she wouldn't tell of anything she'd witnessed. This was thought because when a black light was used on the area where she was found, it revealed human bodily fluids. But the stacks were notorious for couples doing drugs and having sex, so it couldn't really be determined that Betsy had seen anything. The biggest suspect in the case was a man named Richard Hefner, sometimes referred to as Rick. Just hours after the murder, before the news broke, Hefner went to the home of his Penn State professor and asked if they had heard the news about Betsy. It seems that Richard had dated the 22-year-old woman for a brief time, and Hefner told police that their relationship came to an end in October of 1969. Despite the fact that at the time, Betsy had been dating David Wright, and they'd been discussing marriage. Hefner told authorities that he didn't know of the murder until the day after it had occurred, contradicting the account that he'd gone to his professor's home to tell of the news of her death. Despite the suspicious circumstances around Hefner, he was never investigated any further. Worryingly, those who knew him referred to him as a sociopath. He reportedly once drove 800 miles to proclaim his love to a woman he barely knew on her doorstep. He also once punctured a neighbor's tire with a knife and threw dog waste through another neighbor's car window. 6 years later, in 1975, Hefner was arrested for molesting a 13-year-old boy, but the trial resulted in a hung jury. After this, he had frequent run-ins with the law. In 1992, he was accused of inappropriate behavior with a child. And in 1998, he was charged with assaulting a woman in a parking lot, which resulted in the victim receiving a dislocated jaw and loosening several teeth. It's widely believed by online spectators and crime authors that Hefner was responsible for the murder of his one-time girlfriend. Although it's unknown why he seems switched from harming women to young boys, an odd leap to say the least. According to Hefner's nephew, he once heard his mother shout, "You killed that girl, and now you're killing me." Betsy's nephew is convinced that Hefner was responsible for her murder. Hefner passed away in February 2002, and to this day, it remains uncertain whether he was truly behind the crime. Betsy's family never saw justice for her death, and her former boyfriend, David Wright, continues to wonder about what could have been. 50 years later, Betsy's case remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Brian Ninsfield. In January 1997, Brian Dylan Ninsfield was an 18-year-old freshman at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. He was in his second semester and known for being reserved with a small circle of friends. Having experienced his parents' divorce during childhood, Brian and his parents mutually decided on Roger Williams University because of its welcoming, home-like environment. Brian often felt homesick while pursuing his architecture course. In his free time, he enjoyed reading and listening to music by the water near Mount Hope Bridge. However, he was known to feel overwhelmed by the academic demands and struggled to keep up with his studies. On January 31st, Brian's life began to take a troubling turn when he received a disturbing phone call from a former Roger Williams University student. The caller threatened him, claiming he could still access the campus. Following the call, at around 12:30 a.m., Brian contacted his father, asking him to come to the university. Brian's father advised him to contact campus security, but their only suggestion was to change his phone number. A week later, on February 6th, after finishing his literature class, Brian disappeared and was never seen again. His parents were not informed about his disappearance until February 12th. When they arrived at his dorm room, it appeared untouched, but his mother, Marianne, noticed sand in his bed, which alarmed her since Brian was known for being very clean and organized. Not long after his disappearance, Marianne received a call from a woman claiming to be connected to the university. The caller alleged that a school administrator and 2 faculty members were withholding critical information about Brian and his case. However, the line then went dead. Nothing further has come of this lead, and the woman on the other end of the phone has never been 6 months later in September. Labor Day weekend, a mother and daughter walking along the Hog Island beach located a few miles from Brian's school stumbled across the ghastly discovery of a shoe on the shore, which contained part of a foot inside. DNA showed that the limb belonged to Brian, as did a shin bone that was found nearby. No other remains have ever been found, and the student was presumed dead upon the discovery. Eventually, the man who'd made the threatening phone calls to Brian was identified. He was a former student named Josh Cohen, and was pointed out by campus officials. While Josh and Brian were friends during Brian's first semester, it has been suggested that the two were possibly romantically involved, although no one can say for certain. It's alleged that the relationship ended just weeks before Brian's disappearance. While Cohen admitted to making the phone calls, he claimed they were all in jest. Authorities do not believe that Josh Cohen is involved with Brian's disappearance. There are several theories regarding the case of Brian Ninsfield. Police speculate he accidentally fell into the river beneath Mount Hope Bridge, or that perhaps he jumped from the bridge itself. His parents believe their son fell victim to foul play, and that Cohen, who had made the distressing phone calls, was responsible. Another theory put forward by online investigators is that perhaps Cohen was going to come forward about their relationship, and Brian committed suicide as a result, as he was unhappy or uncomfortable with the decision. Brian's parents largely blamed Roger Williams University for failing to notify them when their son vanished. As the first 24 hours are so precious in a missing persons case, they felt they'd have had a better chance of finding Brian alive had they been alerted sooner. His father, Stephen, said, "I remember just this uncaring, unsympathetic, unconcerned by the university." Stephen and Marian later went on to sue the school, although it's uncertain if they won their case or not. They also pushed for a national law requiring faster parental notification when a student goes missing. Roger Williams University exhibited questionable behavior regarding Brian Ninsfield's disappearance. Reportedly, someone in the admissions office instructed university tour guides to tell anyone asking about Brian that he was safe at home with his parents. Additionally, there were allegations that individuals at the university were subtly discouraged from providing information, though the exact methods remain unclear. Staff members were also reportedly directed not to answer any student inquiries about the case. Minimal action seems to have been taken concerning Brian's disappearance, which was largely brushed aside by both the university and local law enforcement. The reasons behind this lack of attention remain unclear, but without proper action from officials, Brian's case may remain unsolved indefinitely. Moving on to the next case, Carlina Renee White. Carlina Renee White was born on July 15, 1987, at Harlem Hospital Center in New York City. When she was 19 old, her parents, Joy White and Carl Tyson, took her back to the hospital after she developed a high fever. A woman, dressed as a nurse, assisted the parents upon their arrival. Unbeknownst to them, this woman was not actually a hospital employee. In the early hours of the morning, she took Carlina from the hospital, kidnapping her. At the time, the hospital's video surveillance system was not functioning, leaving Carlina's parents as the only ones able to describe the woman who took their daughter. This marked the first baby abduction from a New York hospital. Despite widespread distribution of flyers featuring Carlina's image across the country, efforts to locate her proved unsuccessful. In response, her parents filed a $100 million lawsuit against the hospital, ultimately securing a $750,000 settlement. The woman that took Carlina is Anujita and Pedwe. She raised Carlina as Nedra and Nednance in Connecticut. Carlina first suspected that and might not be a real mother when and could not provide a birth certificate. In February 2005, when Carlina fell pregnant and asked again, and provided her with a false certificate. The officials noticed it was forged, however. Carlina then confronted Anne, and confessed then as she was not Carlina's real mother. She lied, however, by telling Carlina as she was abandoned by a drug addict. This caused her to not immediately go look for her real parents. When she was 23 years old, she had started looking on websites for missing people such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There she found a picture of the kidnapped Carlina and noticed that it's similar to the baby pictures she have of herself as Nedra and those of her daughter Simone. She used the hotline to finally get into contact with her birth family. DNA would prove in 2011 that she is indeed the missing Carlina White. And Pedwe is currently serving a 12-year prison sentence in a federal correctional institution in Aliceville, Alabama for the abduction. Carlina now goes by the name Nidhi since it is a name she gave herself. She does have a relationship with her biological parents, and they are making up for lost time. Moving on to the next case. Daisy Evelyn Shelton. What if a long unsolved mystery from the past were to unfold, uncovering dark secrets and concealed truths? How would a community cope with the revelation of a brutal crime after decades of uncertainty? And what occurs when a confession finally offers new hope in solving a cold case? In June 1964, a fisherman discovered a dismembered human arm in a gravel pit east of Tip City, located along State Route 571 in Ohio. This horrifying find led to a thorough search to uncover the remainder of the remains. Attempts to drain the gravel pit were unsuccessful, leaving investigators frustrated and in search of new clues. For days later, another fisherman uncovered a disturbing find: a burlap bag in a section of the old Miami-Erie Canal. Inside the bag was a dismembered human torso. The mystery deepened as a head and a leg were later discovered in the same canal, gradually revealing more of the grim puzzle. The remains were identified as 43-year-old Daisy Evelyn Shelton, a mother from Dayton, Ohio. Daisy resided on Springfield Street and was employed at Delco, an automotive electronics company. According to a missing persons report filed by her daughter, Rita, Daisy was last seen in late August 1963. She had told her daughter that she would return home soon, but never did. Known for her generous nature, Daisy was always there to support those around her and was beloved by her family for her helpfulness. Her life had been cut short, and the circumstances of her demise sent shock waves through the community. Despite the initial fervor of the investigation, leads quickly dried up and the case grew cold. Decades passed without resolution until 2017, when an unexpected break in the case emerged. In a twist that could only be described as fate, a man fearing he was near his end in a hospital bed made a startling confession to a nurse. He claimed to have witnessed the slaying of Daisy Shelton. Fearing his own impending death, the man felt compelled to confess, disclosing long-hidden truths. Miraculously, he survived, and detectives seized the opportunity to interview him. The witness, whose identity was kept confidential for his safety, shared a chilling account of the events leading to Daisy's murder. His vivid recollection of the crime provided crucial details that had eluded investigators back in 1964, offering new insights into a case that had remained unresolved for decades. The witness recounted that he saw an individual take her life by striking her on the head with a hammer at a home on Springfield Street in Dayton. The brutality of the act left a mark on the witness, who described the scene in grim detail. After the initial blow, Daisy Shelton was dismembered in the home by two more men. Her body parts were then discarded in various bodies of water in and around Tip City. Effectively, scattering the evidence made the investigation more challenging for the authorities at the time. The suspect, who was the only one linked to the hammer, cooperated with detectives and agreed to several interviews. Initially, he firmly denied knowing Daisy Shelton, even though they lived on the same street and worked for the same company. However, during an interview in August 2017, his facade began to unravel. Hesitantly, he confessed to knowing Daisy, marking a crucial turning point in the investigation. As the interviews progressed, detectives meticulously pieced together the suspect's movements and interactions with Daisy. They discovered inconsistencies in his statements and unexplained gaps in his alibi for the time of Daisy's slaying. The pressure mounted as forensic evidence combined with the witness's detailed account painted an increasingly damning picture of the suspect's involvement. Detectives explored the possibility of personal vendettas, financial disputes, and other motives that could have led to her brutal slaying. To build a comprehensive case, detectives turned to modern forensic techniques. They re-examined the burlap bag and other physical evidence, hoping to find DNA traces or fingerprints that could irrefutably link the suspect to the crime. Advances in forensic science allowed them to analyze the evidence with a precision that was unimaginable in 1964. The community's response to the reopened case was mixed. For some, the resurfacing of such a horrific crime brought back painful memories, while for others, it reignited a long-dormant hope for justice. Media coverage of the case intensified, with many in Dayton and Tip City following the developments closely. The suspect himself brought up the topic of a box voluntarily, suggesting he could explain why his DNA might be found on it. He claimed it was all a setup, orchestrated by the eyewitness to implicate him. Despite his attempt to deflect suspicion, he admitted that the box had indeed been in his home on Springfield Street. The suspect conceded that a box from his house had been used to carry Daisy's body parts. This admission was a critical breakthrough. The suspect further admitted that it was possible Daisy had lost her life in his home. This was a significant shift from his previous answers, aligning more closely with the witness's account. These admissions combined with the forensic evidence strengthened the case against him. The suspect confessed that he looked guilty and could possibly be convicted in court. He admitted that the mounting evidence, his connection to the box, the location sling, and his relationship with Daisy painted a damning picture. Despite his claims of being framed, his own statements had inadvertently solidified his status as the prime suspect in Daisy's case. They continued to build their case, piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Daisy's demise. They scrutinized the suspect's background, seeking any history of violent behavior or other potential motives. In light of the new evidence and the suspect's partial confessions, the case against him grew stronger. The prosecution prepared to present a comprehensive narrative that would encompass the witness testimony, forensic findings, and the suspect's own incriminating statements. The goal was to provide a clear and convincing argument that would lead to a conviction and finally bring justice to Daisy Shelton. The witness testified at a grand jury hearing but lost his life before the suspect could be prosecuted. The suspect, who was not named, passed away in September 2022 at the age of 92. Despite his demise, the grand jury hearing provided crucial insights into the case. They revealed the depth of the investigation and the compelling evidence gathered against him. The suspect's testimony and the findings were meticulously documented, ensuring that Daisy Shelton's story would not fade into obscurity. Law enforcement officials and legal experts analyzed the suspect's testimony, and the legal experts analyzed the suspect's testimony and the accumulated evidence. They strived to piece together a comprehensive account of the crime. The courage of the eyewitness, who broke his silence after so many years, was instrumental in reigniting the case. His detailed confession, alongside the suspect's reluctant admissions, solidified the narrative of Daisy Shelton's tragic end. Although the suspect's demise precluded a formal trial, The investigation's transparency brought some solace to the community. Public statements from detectives affirmed that every effort had been made to uncover the truth and bring justice to light. Finally, after 60 years, on March 29, 2024, the Miami County Sheriff's Office announced that prosecutor Anthony Kendall determined Daisy Shelton's case was solved. They decided this due to from the suspect, who has now passed away, as well as other evidence. Daisy's granddaughter, Maria Walling, said that her father, Rodney, also passed away before learning what happened to his mom. Maria said they never found the slayer when they found all the body parts, and it really messed him up. She knows the names of the men involved in her grandmother's slaying, but deputies will not release them. I'm like, finally, they found the perpetrators. There were 3. I can't help but feel for the families who will soon learn the truth about how my grandmother's life was taken. While Daisy's family now knows who was responsible for her death, the police have yet to determine a clear motive. Though Daisy Shelton's case may never reach a courtroom verdict, the tireless search for justice, fueled by modern forensic advancements and the courage of a key witness, has ensured that her story is no longer forgotten by time. Moving on to the next case. Benjamin Kyle. On August 31st, 2004, at 5 a.m., a Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia, made an alarming discovery. Behind the restaurant, he found a man who was unconscious, sunburned, and completely naked. The man seemed to have been there for some time, as his body was covered in numerous ant bites. The employee immediately contacted emergency services, and the man was transported to Candler Hospital in Savannah for medical care. Without any identification on him, the man was initially recorded as Burger King Doe in the hospital records. It took 2 weeks for him to regain consciousness. Once awake, he stated that he believed his name was Benjamin, and he chose the last name Kyle, explaining that his initials could match the name of the place where he was found. Afterward, Benjamin was transferred to Memorial Health University Medical Center for further care. They noticed that he had cataracts in both his eyes. A charity was kind enough to pay for his operation to get it removed. Finally, 9 months after he was found, he could see himself in a mirror. Benjamin was surprised to see that he was 20 years older than he believed he was. The next few years spent time in shelters and care centers. In February 2007, he was diagnosed with dissociative amnesia. Benjamin also spent some time being homeless. It was hard finding a job since he couldn't remember his social security number. There were some people that tried to help him remember things from his past so that he could find his family. They looked through missing person databases, but he wasn't in there. What did help though was he started to remember certain things. He remembered that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. The part of his social security number he could later remember was consistent with numbers assigned in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. In 2015, with advances in DNA technology, his sample was taken so it could be entered into a database. Parabon Nanolabs, led by C.C. Moore, led the way in the search for his real identity. Initial results that came back showed that his last name is most likely Powell, and that he is a descendant of a 19th century man named Abraham Lovely Powell. On September 16, 2015, he announced that his real identity has been found. He now knew his real name and close family members. In 2016, he said that his real name is William Burgess Powell. He was born on August 29, 1948 in Lafayette, Indiana. So, remembered correctly that he was born 10 years before Michael Jackson. In 1976, he cut ties with his family and moved to Boulder, Colorado. It's still not really known what happened to him, as it led to him being found. Moving on to the next case. Andrew Gostin. In February 2007, Andrew lived with his parents and sister in Doncaster. On the morning of September 14th, he prepared for school, but he waited in a nearby park until his parents had left for work. Afterward, he returned home, changed out of his uniform, placed it in the washing machine, and took his PSP, leaving the charger behind. There was 100 in his room, but Andrew did not take this money. Instead, he withdrew £200 from his bank account, went to Doncaster railway station, and bought a one-way ticket to London before boarding the 9:35 a.m. train to King's Cross. Witnesses saw him getting on the train alone. The ticket seller at Doncaster recalled Andrew because he declined a return ticket, despite it costing only £0.50 more. Eyewitnesses on the train later reported seeing Andrew, describing him as quiet, and noted that he played with his PSP throughout the journey. He would be captured on CCTV at approximately 11:20 a.m. CCTV imagery of Gosden at King's Cross was not checked until 27 days after his disappearance, by which time the trail had gone cold. CCTV images showed Andrew leaving King's Cross station on the day that he vanished. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. 1 year after Andrew's disappearance, an unidentified man spoke into the intercom at the doorway to Leominster Police Station, claiming to have information about the case. When an officer arrived to answer the door, however, the man had disappeared. There were fears that Andrew may have been groomed by someone that he met online. This was investigated, but searches of his sister's laptop, which he occasionally used, and the school computer found nothing. His parents held the belief that he did not have any social media or email accounts that they were aware of. He also did not own a mobile phone. There was speculation that Andrew may have traveled to the capital to end his own life. His family doubted this but did not rule it out. They paid a company to search the Thames using sonar equipment. A body was found, but it was not Andrew. A further theory was that Andrew ran away in search of a new life. It was reported that his favorite TV show featured a character that left his old life and changed his identity. His parents have continued to put money in his bank account just in case he needs it. However, it has remained untouched since the day he left. After more than 10 years, there is still no trace of Andrew Gosden or any explanation for his mysterious train trip. Denise Bailser. Denise Bailser was a 24-year-old woman residing in Raymond, New Hampshire, and working as a bookkeeper for a small company. On January 17, 1985, she vanished, leaving behind only one clue: a note. When her husband returned home, he discovered the message, which read, "We've got your wife." A few days later, authorities located her pickup truck parked at Logan Airport in Boston. Denise's social security card, birth certificate, and credit cards were neatly arranged and left in the car. Authorities initially pursued the theory that she had been kidnapped but found no substantial evidence beyond the cryptic note. Later, they considered the possibility that she had left voluntarily, though her close-knit family suspected foul play. A year after her disappearance, Denise was indicted in absentia for embezzling $12,000 from her employer. With no further leads, the case eventually went cold. That was until 17 years later in February 2002. It was then that the FBI believed that they found her. She was now going by the name of Denise Jones. She was still a bookkeeper and had started a new family. 42-year-old Denise was elated to see her family when they knocked on the door. She explained that her boss wanted to end her life because of the embezzlement. Denise claimed that it was closer to a $100,000 that she embezzled. The county prosecutors dropped the charges against her because her former boss was long deceased. Denise lived in South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, and Hawaii, while she was missing and lived in Florida since 1996. Her current husband was stunned, but said a lot of things that didn't make sense before did now. Denise would always be depressed on Mother's Day and out of sorts on holidays. She never talked about her family. Moving on to the next case. Derek Michael Mason. In January 1992, the remains of an unidentified individual were found alongside the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Clay Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police responded to the scene and determined that the remains belonged to a male, estimated to be 5 feet 10 inches tall and between 18 and 30 years old. The cause of death was believed to be homicide. At the time of his discovery, the man was wearing a light blue long sleeve sweater from Kate Collins and a size 36 pair of men's Fruit of the Loom jockey style underwear. The man also had a scar on his chest from a previous bullet wound that had healed. In April 2017, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police submitted forensic evidence to Othram. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to a PSP analyst, who performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads that led investigators to potential relatives of the man. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man, who is now known to be Derek Michael Mason. Derek was last seen leaving his home in the 500 block of South 30, 9th Street in West Philadelphia in October 1991. Derek was known in the area by the names Hawkeye and Hawk. He was never reported missing. Anyone with information regarding the slaying of Derek Mason is asked to contact Trooper Brian McNally, PSP Lancaster, at 717-290-1967. PSP Tips is offering a $2,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in this case. Moving on to the next case. Kieran and Ornith Murphy. Kieran and Ornith Murphy were an Irish couple who relocated to the United States in the 1960s. Kieran worked as an actuary for San Francisco's Employee Retirement System office, while Ornith was an expert solo sailor. Ornith was well known in the sailing community and occasionally sailing magazines. She owned a 1980 39-foot fiberglass auxiliary sailboat named Sola 3. The vessel featured dark blue circular emblems with a gray swirl painted on both sides, making it easily recognizable. The couple lived in San Francisco and had two sons, David and Patrick. Kieran did not know how to sail, and being on the water made him seasick, but he did help with the maintenance of the boat. They had amassed a small fortune through real estate speculation. 4 years, Kieran and Ornith lived a happy life, but in 2001 their marriage started to fall apart due to Kieran having an affair. The couple were in the midst of getting a divorce later in the year. Along with the potential divorce, the Murphys were also facing a potentially costly lawsuit stemming from a 1999 fire at one of their apartment complexes, which severely burned a 2-year-old girl. At the time, Kieran was living in an apartment in Nob Hill, and Ornith had moved in with her niece in Oakland. Her boat was docked at the Oakland Marina in the Jack London Square area of the city. On December 15, 2001, both Kieran and Ornith would vanish along with Ornith's sailboat. Kieran was last seen at a Christmas office party on December 14th. Kieran has never been heard from again. His friends and family became concerned when he failed to report for work on December 17th, and they filed a missing persons report. It was at this point that they realized that Ornith was also missing. Ornith was last seen in Oakland on December 16th, the day after Kieran had gone missing. The sailboat disappeared on the same day as Ornith and has never been located. It was found that Kieran and Ornith had planned to meet on December 15th to discuss legal issues. Ornith was seen working on her boat that afternoon. A witness reported seeing a man on board who was similar in appearance to Kieran. However, it was never established if he really was Kieran. Witnesses also reported hearing a loud noise coming from the boat in the evening. They described it as a banging noise. However, they weren't sure if the sounds were of gunshots. The boat was captured on video surveillance pulling out of the Oakland Marina at 8:36 p.m. that night. The boat was not equipped for long-distance sailing. It had about 1 week's worth of food on it when it disappeared, but no safety or foul weather gear. The next morning, Ornith called her niece from the boat and said she was in the marina in Berkeley. Her niece invited her to breakfast, but Ornith declined the invitation. No one ever heard from Kieran or Ornith again. Kieran's friends say that Kieran was planning on a trip to Mexico after Christmas. The couple's sons say it would be uncharacteristic of them to leave without warning. One theory surrounding the disappearance of Kieran and Ornith Murphy suggests that Ornith shot Kieran and then took her own life shortly afterward. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. Despite the speculation, neither of the couple's credit cards nor their bank accounts have been accessed since their disappearances. Now, 18 years later, the Murphys remain missing, with no definitive answers about what happened to them during that time. Moving on to the next case. Maritza gleamed Grimmet. In April 1983, children discovered the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual in a culvert in what is now Lake Forest, California. Responding to the scene near Old Trabuco and Canada Roads, an excavation was conducted to recover more remains. Upon examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to a female who was likely black or of mixed race. She was estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall, and between the ages of 18 and 24. Jane Doe was also noted to have a distinctive gold tooth. It was determined that the woman had been the victim of a homicide. In August 2010, the details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Over the years, multiple forensic renderings of the woman were released in hopes of generating new leads. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement to identify her, no matches were found, and the case eventually went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could help to finally identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads in the case. Using these new leads, investigators contacted a distant genetic relative of the victim, who suggested Jane Doe's forensic renderings be posted to a Facebook group for Jane Does and missing women from the 1970s-1980s. Approximately 1 month after the posting, a woman contacted investigators and said she believed the Lake Forest Jane Doe could be her missing mother. Lake Forest Jane Doe is now known to be Maritza Glean Grimmet, a Panamanian native, married a U.S. Marine in the summer of 1978, and gave birth to a daughter. In late 1978, the family moved to the U.S. The family resided in Columbus, Ohio, and Millington, Tennessee in late 1978 through mid-1979. In July 1979, the couple was going through a divorce. Maritza told her sister she was going to California. Her family never heard from her again since. She was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. Investigators are actively investigating Maritza's slaying. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact Investigator Bob Taft at 714-647-7045 or coldcase@oaksheriff.gov. Anonymous tips may be submitted to OC Crime Stoppers at 855-847-6227 or at occrimestoppers.org. Moving on to the next case. Lynn Scholes. Lynn Scholes, a 17-year-old freshman at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, was looking forward to her final exams in December 1971. She had studied diligently for her English drama exam scheduled for 1 p.m. on December 10th. At 12:55 p.m., Lynn left her dormitory with her friends to head to the exam. However, on the way there, she realized she had forgotten her lucky pen and told her friends she was going back to retrieve it from her room. That would be the last time Lynn was seen by her friends. She never returned to take her exam, and when they went to her dorm room, she was nowhere to be found. Although her friends initially thought it was strange, they waited for 2 days before reporting her as missing. A week later, her parents were informed of her disappearance. Lynn's personal belongings, including her checkbook, identification, and wallet, were left behind in her dorm room. During the police investigation, they found that on the day Lynn went missing, she was seen outside of a health food store called All the Good Things, eating prunes, just prior to meeting up with her friends to take the exam at around 12:30 p.m. During that time, she had reportedly mentioned to someone that she was going to be going to New York, but that the bus had already left. Lynn then returned to campus where she had that walk with her friends and reportedly claimed she left her pen back in her dorm room. Later that day, witnesses reported to have seen Lynn again standing at the same bus stop where she was seen earlier around 2:15 p.m. This 2:15 p.m. confirmed sighting of her would be the last. Police at the time considered the possibility that Lynn had left of her own accord. Lynn had previously sent letters to her family stating she was homesick and was thinking of withdrawing from school. However, Her friends and family said she was looking forward to going back to her home in Addison County, Vermont for the Christmas holidays, and they do not believe she would have run away. There were several sightings of Lynn in the days following her disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. The case would soon grow cold. Then in February 2015, a tip led investigators to link Robert Durst as suspect in Lynn's disappearance. Robert Durst was the owner of the All Good Things health food store, the same store that Lynn was last seen eating prunes in front of. Moreover, the store was across the street from the bus stop where Lynn was also seen. Robert Durst is the prime suspect in his wife Kathleen Durst's disappearance, and is also a suspect in the unsolved murder of Susan Berman. He was charged and acquitted for the murder of Morris Black in February 2003. He is also considered a possible suspect in several other murders and disappearances. And his complete troubling story is explored in HBO's documentary, The Jinx. Before the tip, investigators were unaware that Robert Durst had once owned the health food store, All Good Things. However, there is no solid evidence connecting him to Lynn's disappearance, and no new information has been released to the public. The case remains unsolved, and anyone with information about Lynn's whereabouts or what happened to her is urged to contact Detective Chris Bodish at 802-388-3191. Moving on to the next case. Stephanie Nurse. Stephanie Nurse was born on April 28, 1997, at Grootshire Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa. Celeste, her mother, recalled seeing a nurse comforting Stephanie next to her bed before she fell asleep. However, when Celeste woke up, a nurse was urgently asking where Stephanie was. It was then that Celeste realized her daughter had been taken. First, she thought it might have been a cruel joke, but as time went on, it became clear that their daughter had been abducted. Each year on April 28th, a family would celebrate Stephanie's birthday. They also did a lot of interviews to keep the search for her in the media. In July 2009, the family received a call where a woman whispered, "I know about your daughter." The woman then asked the $500,000, which is about 70,000 US. When they went to the spot where the drop-off was supposed to take place, no one arrived to collect the money. The call was later traced to Glenda Debell, who was a neighbor of Celeste Nurse. Linda was charged with extortion. The nurses also had a second daughter, named Cassidy Nurse. She started at a new school in 2015. There she met a girl 4 years older than her that looked very similar to her. Cassidy shared the news with her father, Mornay Nurse, who then arranged to meet a woman named Mikey Solomon. When Mornay saw Mikey, he immediately noticed a striking resemblance, and he began to believe that she might be his daughter, Zephanie. DNA tests were conducted, confirming that Mikey Solomon was indeed Zephanie Nurse. In August 2016, Lavona Solomon, the woman who had taken Zephanie and raised her as her own, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. It is believed that Lavona had concealed a miscarriage and the remainder pregnancy before abducting Zephanie and pretending to have given birth to her. Moving on to the next case. Daniel Entwistle. On May 3, 2003, 7-year-old Daniel Entwistle from Great Yarmouth, England, returned home after running an errand for his mother. After entering the house, Daniel asked his father, David Entwistle, for money to buy some sweets. He left again and was captured on the store's CCTV. Daniel was seen once more on the store's surveillance camera, cycling by. This was the last confirmed sighting of Daniel. His red and white bike was discovered along a harbor wall near the River Yar, about half a mile from his home, at around 3 a.m. on Sunday, May 4th. Authorities initially speculated that he might have fallen into the river and drowned, but his body was never found, possibly swept out to the North Sea. However, Daniel was afraid of water and unable to swim, making it seem unlikely that he would have climbed the harbor wall, putting himself at risk of falling into the river. In February 2003, Joseph Sigier came forward a few days after Daniel disappeared and said he had seen Daniel playing with some kids near a raised wall by the River Yar, where Daniel's bike was found, around lunchtime on May 3rd and again around 4 p.m. that same day. Zaggers said Daniel and other children often played there. What's interesting about Zaggers' claim is that it conflicts with Daniel's mother, Paula's, statement on where she and the family went that day. Paula claimed the whole family went shopping earlier in the day, returned home, and then Paula went to rest as she felt unwell, yet Zager claimed to have seen Daniel playing around lunchtime. Despite a large police search of the area, Daniel was never found. Heartbreakingly, due to few funds and no PR campaign, his disappearance stopped being reported by the media after only a few days, and the case was closed by police just 3 months after he had vanished. The boy's father, David Entwistle, died in February 2015. It is worth noting that David was convicted of having sex with a 12-year-old girl back in 1985. Police were aware of the conviction when Daniel vanished, but it was never made public. David was interviewed by detectives before his death in the search for his son, but never made a suspect. Daniel remains missing to this day. Moving on to the next case. Keenan Day Bennett. In criminal cases, proving that a crime has taken place can be challenging when there is no body. Without this key evidence, the defense can argue that there is sufficient room for doubt, suggesting that the victim may have disappeared voluntarily. Historically, securing a conviction in murder cases without a body has been difficult. However, with advancements in forensic technology, we are now witnessing more cases where justice is achieved despite the absence of a body. On September 29, 2002, Vartasha McCullough informed Kmart staff that her 4-year-old daughter, Cananda Bennett, was missing. According to McCullough, they had visited the Kmart in Whiteville, North Carolina around 5 p.m. when the girl disappeared. Initially, McCullough claimed that Cananda vanished from an aisle in the store. However, she later revised her statement, saying she had entered the Kmart thinking her daughter was behind her, only to turn around and find her missing. McCullough and her daughter were from Conway, South Carolina, and had been visiting Cananda's uncle in Whiteville at the time. Although the Kmart staff called emergency CCTV cameras in the store, there was no footage showing the 4 of CCTV cameras in the store. There was no footage showing the 4-year-old. Investigators also found no evidence that Cananda had even entered the state. Aside from her parents, McCullough and Eddie Bennett Jr., who went by Kevin, no one had seen her in the 2 days leading up to her disappearance. Authorities searched the couple's car, but there was no child seat in it, and no other signs that a young child had been present except a single Matchbox toy car, which they found wedged under a seat. As law enforcement officers became more doubtful about the McCullough story, they were approached by further witnesses from the couple's hometown who claimed that they had seen Cananda with bruises on her shoulder and face just days before she vanished. When asked about them, the 4-year-old said, "My mommy did it." While one witness did confront Cananda's mother, McCullough told them, "I'm going to whip her ass for telling you." Further fueling this idea, a second witness seen cuts on the child's body and marks that looked as if they'd been caused by a strap. And Canine's grandparents had become so concerned for her welfare that on September 29th, the very day she went missing, they told the police in Conway that they suspected the 4-year-old was being abused. They had not seen Cananda in a week, and before contacting police, they went to confront their daughter with their suspicions. But while they heard someone moving around inside her apartment, nobody answered the door. Investigators noted that both of Cananda's parents seemed uninterested in her case and never asked for any updates beyond the first week of the investigation. Additionally, McCullough failed a polygraph test regarding her daughter's disappearance while Cananda's father, Kevin Bennett, refused to take one, although both had samples of their blood and saliva taken. According to the authorities, both were uncooperative and both had inconsistencies in their stories. When McCullough was told that she had failed her polygraph, she reportedly cried. An officer said to her, "We both know that whatever happened to that child did not happen in North Carolina. It happened in that apartment, didn't it?" Here, Cananda's mother reportedly nodded. However, when she was asked to take them to where the body was, she told them she couldn't. After regaining her composure, McCullough retracted her previous admission and maintained that she had lost her daughter while at the Kmart store. When the police searched the family's home in Conway, things got worse. Investigators noted that the home had been sanitized with bleach, the smells still lingering in the air. 3 bottles of the substance, a damp mop, and several towels lay in plain sight. McCullough claimed that she was cleaning the apartment in preparation for an upcoming inspection by housing authorities, but officers believed she was attempting to clean up a crime scene. Searches of the home turned up transfer stains, which are stains left behind when fluid splatters are wiped, which matched Cananda's DNA. Authorities said that the scene would suggest that a physical assault had taken place. Furthermore, Cananda's toys and clothing had been thrown out, as if her parents didn't believe she'd be coming home. And both McCullough and Bennett used past tense when talking about their missing daughter. In February, Hennon's parents were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with their daughter's case. Investigators claimed that the DNA evidence found in the apartment proved that the 4-year-old had died in Conway and had never even set foot in South Carolina. This combined with the numerous witness statements about Cananda's abuse led to the couple being charged. Around the same time, however, the parents accused the police of racism as they felt they did not conduct enough searches for their daughter. 2 years later, in February, Bennett's charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. McCullough, however, was charged with more crimes, including unlawful neglects of a child and inflicting grievous bodily harm on a child. Throughout her trial, McCullough maintained her innocence. The prosecution theorized that Cananda's death was unintentional and that her mother had panicked and attempted to conceal the crime. However, the mother of one's defense said that McCullough had always maintained that she was not guilty and that the state has no evidence to the contrary. Despite this, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. McCullough was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Reportedly, she burst into tears and clutched a Bible upon hearing this verdict, and her family appeared to be visibly upset by the news. McCullough's father, the one who'd reported his granddaughter's abuse to the police, believes his daughter is innocent. In the years since, McCullough has never told investigators what happened or where Kynane's body is. Kynane's was described as a bright and well-mannered young girl who could read simple words and count to 30. She was a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants. Investigators suspect that her father was involved in her disappearance, and they have stated that they will pursue charges if new evidence emerges. Natasha McCullough is scheduled for release from prison in 2023. Cananda's case marked the first time in South Carolina history that a trial for a child's murder was held without the discovery of a body. Moving on to the next case. Lillian Marie Cardenas. In February 1967, unidentified remains were found at the bottom of a cliff north of Jenner, Sonoma County, California. The remains belonged to a woman who was between 52 and 54 inches tall. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse that buttoned down the back, along with light-colored pants. It was determined that she had likely died the previous year. Her manner of demise was ruled as slaying. She had multiple skull and rib fractures. Despite investigators' attempts, the woman could not be identified. She became known as Sonoma County Jane Doe. A forensic composite was developed. The case was made public in hopes of generating new leads about the woman's identity, but no matches were found. She was buried at the Sonoma County Cemetery. The details of the case were later added to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. In February 2009, her body was exhumed with the help of Dr. Mark Griffin, an anthropology professor from San Francisco State University. The examination determined that Jane Doe was a white female between 40 and 46 years old. In 2022, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Arthram, hoping that advanced DNA testing could assist with the identification of the woman. Arthram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Arthram's in-house genealogy team used the DNA profile in a forensic genetic genealogy search to produce new investigative leads, which were returned to investigators. A follow-up investigation was conducted by law enforcement with the new leads. This led to relatives of the unidentified woman. Nearly 60 years after the remains were discovered in Sonoma County, the remains have been identified as Lillian Marie Cardenas, who was born in 1928. Lillian's last known residence was in San Francisco. She had been estranged from her family prior to her demise. The investigation into her demise is ongoing. Investigators ask for anyone with information on Lillian Marie Cardenas to dial 707-565-5555 2727 or email officials at sheriff-coldcase@sonoma-county.org. Moving on to the next case. Xavier Rollins. On June 17, 2014, a young man tragically lost his life outside the River Crossing apartment complex in Texarkana, Texas. Xavier Rollins, a 25-year-old Army veteran, was the beloved son of Charlotte Rollins. Charlotte, despite facing numerous challenges, never gave up in her relentless pursuit of justice for her son. Years later, a breakthrough in the case would finally provide answers to what had once seemed like an unsolvable mystery. Xavier, who shared a close and loving bond with his mother, spent much of his time with her, and their relationship was built on love and mutual support. Everything changed on June 17, 2014, when Xavier was fatally shot outside the River Crossing apartment complex on College Drive. At just 25 years old, he had been out of the Army for 4 years and was working hard to build a future for himself. Although an investigation into his death was launched, no significant leads came forward, and the case remained unsolved, leaving Charlotte to cope with her profound loss. Despite the case going cold, her resolve to seek justice never faltered. On the 8th anniversary of Xavier's death, June 17, 2022, Charlotte organized a balloon release in an effort to renew attention on the case and encourage anyone with information to come forward. This poignant event was not just a tribute to Xavier, but also a call to the community to remember the impact of violence and to support families like hers who are left searching for answers. She expressed the following, encapsulating the longing for closure that she and countless other families endure. If someone came forward, I would know my prayers have been answered. Charlotte brought a banner adorned with photographs of local crime victims, highlighting the ongoing struggle for justice faced by many. She stated, "We have some of them that yes, the case has been solved, but we have a whole lot of them that have not been solved." In 2024, a significant breakthrough occurred in the long unsolved case of Xavier Rollins, renewing hope for his family and friends. The police never ceased their efforts to find justice for Xavier, and Detective Thomas Shaddix had been diligently working on the cold case for several months. His commitment to uncovering the truth led him to discover DNA evidence, testing options that had not been available a decade earlier. Recognizing the potential of this technology, he decided to pursue it, in hopes of finally finding answers for the Rollins family. As Detective Shaddix delved deeper into the investigation, he sought the expertise of the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, which provided invaluable assistance. Their collaboration was made possible through a federal grant program from the Department of Justice, allowing them access to numerous resources, including expedited forensic testing. These advanced forensic methods enabled law enforcement to identify 27-year-old Cameron Cheatham as a suspect in the 2014 slaying of Xavier. Following the identification of Cheatham, the Attorney General's office played a critical role in facilitating his arrest. Using the newly uncovered evidence, Detective Shaddix secured a warrant for Cheatham, charging him with capital slaying. Cheatham was not difficult to locate, as he was already in custody at the Bi-State Jail, serving time for a felony probation violation warrant stemming from his arrest in September. This fortunate turn of events allowed the police to expedite the legal process and ensure that justice was being sought for Xavier. On October 1st, 2024, Charlotte received the life-changing call she had been longing for. She will never forget the moment when Detective Shaddix informed her of the arrest. Charlotte recalled, her voice filled with emotion, and he said, "We made an arrest, and I just went to screaming and hollering and yelling. I mean, you would have thought that I had just had a baby for the first time. That is what that felt like. It is like, okay, I'm about to get justice for my baby," she shared. "I have got 30 to 40 shirts with his picture on them. Everywhere I went, he was going to see his face." After the arrest, Cheatham was booked on a capital murder charge, with his bond set at a substantial $1 million. The upcoming trial brought a renewed sense of purpose and closure, reigniting the hope that had gradually diminished over the years. Kathy and Small. On February 22, 1986, a woman's body was discovered on a remote road in South Pasadena, California. The scene was chilling, with the victim found wearing only a nightgown, having been both stabbed and strangled. Kathy and Small, a devoted mother, had her life cruelly taken. The pursuit of justice for her murder would span 3 decades, but a shocking revelation eventually emerged, linking her case to one of California's most notorious serial offenders. Born in 1967, Kathy and Small was known for her loving and caring nature, especially when it came to her family. By the time she turned 19, Kathy was already a mother of 2 young children, fully embracing the responsibilities of motherhood while also being a protective big sister and devoted daughter. On the morning of February 22, 1986, a woman's body was found on a road in South Pasadena. She was dressed only in a nightgown, and it was evident that she had endured a violent attack. Authorities observed that she had been both stabbed and strangled, with no identification found at the scene. Her lifeless body provided little information, and for days, the mystery of her identity remained unsolved. That is until a breakthrough came from a man in Lake Elsinore who had seen a newspaper story about the murder. He contacted authorities, believing the victim might be his roommate, Kathy and Small. This pivotal lead quickly redirected the focus of the investigation, and the man was able to positively identify Kathy as the woman found in South Pasadena. According to the man, Kathy had been living with him in Lake Elsinore for a few months and had been working as a prostitute in the area. His revelation painted a different picture of Kathy's recent life, one that was unknown to her family in France. He shared with the detectives that Kathy had left his house the night before her body was discovered, wearing the same nightgown in which she was found. It was a chilling detail that would later tie directly into the events leading up to her tragic end. The man further explained that Kathy had told him she was meeting someone named Bill that night. Kathy had mentioned that Bill had given her $50 to drive with him to Los Angeles, a detail that provided investigators with a potential lead on who might have been involved in her murder. With Kathy's identity confirmed and new information about her final hours emerging, detectives focused on uncovering the truth about what happened the night she met Bill. Over the years, detectives pursued several leads in Kathy's case, but none brought them closer to solving the crime. The breakthrough came 3 decades later when a sheriff's detective received a call from an investigator with the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner. The examiner had been at the scene of a natural death at a residence directly across the street from where Kathy's body had been discovered 33 years earlier. Inside the home, a 63-year-old man had been found lifeless on his living room couch. He lived alone and had no children, but the investigation into his home would prove crucial to Kathy's cold case. While examining the deceased man's home, the coroner's investigator made a disturbing discovery. Scattered among his belongings were numerous photographs of women who appeared to have been given illegal substances, assaulted, and possibly held against their will. These troubling images suggested a dark side to the man's life. Further raising suspicion was a newspaper article found in his bedroom, which reported the identification of Kathy Small as the victim found stabbed and strangled in South Pasadena in 1986. The eerie coincidence of the article and the photos prompted investigators to revisit Kathy's unsolved case. With this significant link, the detectives sought a search warrant for the home, hoping to uncover evidence that could connect the deceased man to Kathy's demise. Several items were recovered and sent for DNA testing, with the hope that modern forensic analysis could finally provide answers. The criminalists tested these items, searching for any trace of DNA that could tie the man to the crime scene or Kathy herself. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn. DNA tests revealed that the decedent's DNA did not match the DNA found on Kathy. Despite the disturbing items in his possession and the proximity of his home to the crime scene, the man was ultimately not linked to her slaying. His DNA did not correspond with any known criminal cases, leaving detectives with a setback. Yet, the investigation was far from over. With the case reopened, detectives decided to retrieve all the original evidence that had been held since 1986. The materials were transported to the Sheriff's Crime Lab in Los Angeles for comprehensive DNA analysis, using advanced technology unavailable years before. This new analysis of the old evidence ultimately unlocked the mystery that had haunted Kathy's case for over 3 decades, providing long-awaited answers to the questions. On August 19, 2020, Slang detectives received a pivotal notification from a criminalist that significantly advanced the investigation. DNA tests conducted on the assault kit and the victim's clothing revealed the presence of DNA from 2 male donors. One of the individuals was identified as William Lester Suff, a convicted serial offender with a notorious reputation. Known as the Riverside prostitute perpetrator or the Lake Elsinore perpetrator, Suff had been responsible for a string of brutal slayings in Southern California. Suff's criminal history was extensive and horrifying. In January 1992, he was arrested during a routine traffic stop, which eventually led to his conviction for the end of 12 women in Riverside County between 1989 and 1991. His violent spree earned him an end-of-life sentence, and he had been on capital punishment for those cases. But Suff's criminal history stretched back even further. He had been convicted in 1974 for taking the life of his own 2-month-old daughter in Texas. For that crime, Suff was sentenced to 70 years in prison, but he was paroled in 1984 and moved to California, where his slaying spree resumed. After the DNA match in Kathy Small's case, detectives knew they were on the verge of a breakthrough. In May 2022, Suff was transported from San Quentin Prison to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Men's Central Jail for questioning. Over the course of 2 days, the detectives interviewed him about Kathy. During these interviews, Suff confessed to ending her life and provided disturbing details about her final moments. His confession also included admissions to some of his previous slayings in Riverside County, further solidifying his brutal legacy. William Muster Suff remains on Execution Row at San Quentin State Prison, where he is awaiting execution for his convictions. A press conference was held in August 2024. Lieutenant Thomas read a statement from Kathy's younger sister, Deanna Larson, who lives out of state. Deanna was 10 at the time her sister lost her life, but said that she sensed her sister was trying to get her life on track. She said in her statement, before she could take another step forward, her life was ended. The man who ended my sister also destroyed me, my family, and the family of others. I don't know why Kathy decided to go with Bill that night. I have spent nearly my entire life trying to understand who took the life of my sweet sister. I think of her every day. Moving on to the next case. Helen Terry. On August 28, 1980, a young mother was brutally murdered in her Sacramento, California apartment. The crime scene, marked by 13 stab wounds and a terrified 1-year-old crawling through the aftermath, became one of the city's most enduring unsolved cases for over 4 decades. Investigators faced numerous challenges in identifying Helen Terry's killer until, decades later, an arrest was finally made. Helen, 27 years old, lived in the Orangewood West Apartments on Wyndham Drive in Sacramento. Known for her deep devotion to her family, Helen was a loving and hardworking mother, determined to provide the best life possible for her 1-year-old son. At the center of Helen's life at the time was an ongoing paternity suit against Robert Terry, who was believed to be the biological father of her son. Helen was seeking child support from Robert in the hope of securing financial stability for her child's future. On August 28, 1980, a neighbor witnessed a disturbing scene unfold outside Helen's apartment. The neighbor saw a man aggressively pounding on her door, followed by chaotic sounds from inside the apartment. Shuffling noises and blood-curdling screams echoed through the walls. The commotion outside painted a terrifying picture of the violence unfolding behind closed doors. Fearing for her own safety, the neighbor hesitated to intervene and could not call the police, as she didn't have a phone. Shortly afterward, another resident in the complex complained of water leaking into their unit. When the apartment manager entered Helen's apartment to investigate the leak, he discovered a horrifying scene. Helen had been brutally stabbed 13 times and was left to die on the bathroom floor. The water that had caused concern was from a running faucet, adding to the disarray of the crime scene. Her 1-year-old son was found alone in the apartment. Crawling through the aftermath of the vicious attack, the police were immediately called to the scene, and investigators quickly began piecing together what had transpired. Blood stains were scattered throughout the apartment and furniture was overturned, indicating a violent struggle had taken place. It was clear that Helen had fought desperately against her attacker before succumbing to her fatal injuries. Despite the clues left behind, including the chaotic state of the apartment and the extensive blood evidence, identifying a suspect would prove to be a challenging task. Sacramento police launched an intense investigation into Helen's slaying. They combed through the evidence, interviewed residents, and pursued every possible lead in hopes of catching the perpetrator. A $2,500 reward was offered to encourage anyone with information to come forward. However, despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community's desire for justice, no suspect was identified. The case gradually grew cold as detectives found themselves unable to develop any tangible leads or witnesses to push the investigation forward. Years went by with no answers, and Helen's case remained one of Sacramento's many unsolved cases. However, in February 2016, hope was reignited when an investigator from the department's cold case unit decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. With advances in DNA technology, investigators were then able to re-examine the physical evidence collected from the crime scene in the hope of finding new leads. As the cold case team processed the old evidence, a major breakthrough occurred. DNA found at the crime scene of Helen pointed to a familiar name, Robert Terry, the man Helen had been embroiled in a paternity and child support dispute with at the time of her demise. This discovery immediately raised suspicions, as Robert had been a figure in Helen's life during a tumultuous period, but he had never been formally charged or named a suspect in the years following her slaying. Despite the promising DNA evidence linking Robert to the crime scene, detectives faced significant challenges. They needed more than just a DNA match to build a solid case against him. Investigators found themselves in a difficult position, knowing that while the DNA provided a potential lead, it was not enough to definitively place Robert at the scene of the crime at the time it occurred. There were still gaps in the timeline and insufficient corroborating evidence to bring charges against him. In 2024, new developments in Helen's case emerged when the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office Cold Case, Science and Technology Unit took on the decades-old investigation. Using advanced investigative methods, detectives uncovered enough new evidence to finally charge Robert Terry with the slaying of Helen Terry. On September 27, 2024, 81-year-old Robert, residing in Rancho Cordova, was arrested and booked into Sacramento County Jail. Authorities have not yet confirmed whether Robert was the biological father of Helen's one-year-old son. Their contentious relationship, compounded by the unresolved paternity dispute, remained at the center of the investigation. The police continued to examine their interactions and what role the paternity issue may have played in the motive behind the slaying. Robert Terry is set to appear in court for a bail hearing on October 17th, where further details about the case may come to light. His arrest at this late stage in life brought a shocking conclusion to a cold case that had stumped detectives for over 4 decades. Helen's brother, John Mays, said, "She was very kind, very loving. That's why we can't even imagine something like that happening to her. It was totally uncalled for. We've been wondering since day one, and this is the first bit of hope we've had since then. And we're going to take it as far as we can. We had suspicions, but there wasn't much we could do with just suspicions. When it finally came down to us, it was like a huge relief, like something we had known all along but could never prove." Moving on to the next case. Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. On June 21, 2000, in Winter Park, Florida, a resident noticed cats playing with an object and went to investigate. The object turned out to be a human skull, discovered at the Orange County apartment community. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office responded and conducted a search of the area. Additional skeletal remains, along with clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small caliber firearm was also recovered near the remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40-60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The sheriff's office submitted forensic evidence to Athram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. DNA was extracted from the remains, and in January 2024, Othram identified the individual as Paul Lawrence Larry Rogier Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was around 40 years old at the time of his death. Larry grew up in the Winter Park area with his siblings and graduated from Orlando's Colonial Park High School. The Orange County Sheriff's Office encourages anyone with information that could assist in solving Larry Rogier's case to contact Detective Lowen at 407-254-7000. Moving on to the next case. Catherine Namath. In October 2002, Catherine Namath visited her parents' cabin on Noon Lake, Wisconsin, on a rainy night. The cabin was empty as her parents had left earlier that day for their winter home in Florida. Namath had stopped by to grab some food from the freezer. A few minutes after arriving, she called for help on her radio. She used her radio identification number saying, "This is 96. There's a man with a raincoat, and he's scruffy looking," and then the radio went dead. Her husband tried to contact her by radio without success. He then decided to go to the cabin with their son. When they arrived at the cabin, they found Namath lying on the floor. She was still breathing and was semi-conscious. They asked her if she knew the attacker, but she said she didn't know. She died while being airlifted to the hospital. Officials said that nothing was stolen and that it didn't appear to be a random attack. Evidence from the cabin showed that she was chased through the property trying to fight off her attacker but received multiple stab wounds. Police have DNA evidence but have been unable to match it to anyone. Some speculated that the killing might be linked to an embezzlement investigation involving her husband and 3 others from the Elko Fire Department Board. The investigation was eventually resolved when the former treasurer admitted to embezzling at least $3,500 and was dismissed. Despite this, there have been no suspects or new leads, and Catherine's murder remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Gary Lee Haney. On January 3, 1979, a duck hunter stumbled upon human remains belonging to a male, tangled in fishing line on the tide flats near Spencer Island, just south of Marysville, Washington. The Snohomish County Coroner's Office labeled the victim John Doe 791, as he was the first John Doe found that year. Despite efforts from Coroner Robert Phillips, the cause of death remained unclear. By March 1979, the man had still not been identified, and the Cassidy Funeral Home laid him to rest at Cypress Lawn Cemetery in Everett, Washington. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office later revisited the location where the remains were discovered, but found no additional evidence. Over the years, the case went cold. In February 2008, Detective Jim Scharf from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team, alongside retired Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Ken Cowsert, began to re-examine the unidentified persons case. With advancements in DNA technology, they hoped to exhume the remains to collect DNA samples that had not been taken during the initial investigation. However, the process of reviewing the case, obtaining exhumation permits, and conducting DNA testing would take several years. In July 2015, the remains of the John Doe were exhumed from Cypress Lawn Cemetery, with officials from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and the Medical Examiner's Office present. The remains were then transported to the Medical Examiner's Office for further examination and given the name Spencer Island Doe. Additionally, forensic odontologist Dr. Kyle Tanaka took dental radiographs and uploaded them to NCIC and NAMAS, hoping to find a match with a missing person. NCIC, the FBI's National Crime Information Center database, is a computerized system that tracks crimes and missing persons, allowing law enforcement agencies nationwide to compare cases. However, no dental matches were found in the NCIC database. In February, forensic artist Natalie Murray took measurements and photographs and drew a facial reconstruction of what the John Doe may have looked like in life. In February, Dr. Kathy Taylor, the Washington State forensic anthropologist at the King County Medical Examiner's Office, performed an examination of the remains and estimated that they belonged to an adult male with Caucasian ancestry between 50 to 56 in height and between 27 to 61 years old. In September of 2018, a section of the right femur was sent to the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center for DNA extraction and was uploaded to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System. From 2018 to 2021, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner investigators ruled out numerous missing persons by circumstances, testing, and dental records. In 2021, the Medical Examiner's Office began collaborating with Othram Incorporated to obtain an advanced DNA profile suitable for investigative genetic genealogy. In January of 2021, a section of the femur bone from Spencer Island John Doe was sent to Othram. The funding for the laboratory work in this case was generously provided through DNAsolves.com. In May of 2021, Othram successfully obtained a DNA extract that was sufficient for testing after multiple rounds of extraction and human enrichment. Biogeographical analysis of the DNA profile revealed that the John Doe was in fact Caucasian. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office uploaded the Othram DNA profile to genealogical databases that allow law enforcement to search and obtain several matches. Adam Wilcoxon built ancestry trees from several of the top matches and found a male who went missing in the Everett, Washington area in the late 1970s named Gary Lee Haney. DNA reference testing of Gary's half-sister ultimately confirmed that Spencer Island Doe was Gary Lee Haney, who was about 29 years old when he went missing. The identification was made in March of 2023. Gary was apparently not reported missing, or at least investigators found no record of that. He was born in Topeka, Kansas, and traveled the world with his mother and adoptive father, who was in the Air Force. Gary loved the Beatles and to play the piano. His parents both passed away when he was young, and he got estranged from the rest of his relatives, so the only photos of him are as a child. The circumstances of his disappearance are not known. Gary's cousin, Hal Thane from Texas, was able to provide a lot of information. He said, "It is a relief and closure to know about Gary." He also said that Gary Lee Haney was born Gary Joseph Condamiti on September 23, 1950. His mother, Bernice Schaefer, and his biological father divorced when he was very young. Around 1955, his mother remarried to Sheldon Lee Haney, who adopted him and renamed him Gary Lee Haney, legally changing even his middle name to match his stepfather. Hal Thane, now 71, saw his cousin Gary in person maybe twice in his life when they were both kids. His uncle Sheldon served in the Air Force, so the family lived in places all across the country from Kansas to New York City. His clearest memories of his cousin are captured in a few precious black and white pictures. Young Gary cradling a Cocker Spaniel puppy. Young Gary holding a bigger dog's leash beside his mother in a pale dress, and his stepfather in a white dress shirt and slacks. Young Gary with his front teeth peeking out from a half smile on what looks like a school picture day. Hal Thane said Gary had some sort of a mental disorder. Given what he knows, he wonders if Gary lived with autism. He'd heard another family member describe him as schizophrenic in adulthood. Gary's biological father, Joseph Condamiti, passed away at a Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was about 16. His mother passed away when he was 19. His adoptive father completed his military service and worked at Boeing until his retirement. The family lived in the Everett area from the early 1970s until at least 1990. If you have any information regarding this case, please contact the Snohomish Police Department at 360-568-0888. The two teens. In the 1960s and 1970s, two teenagers were brutally murdered and their killers seemed to have vanished without a trace. However, nearly 60 years later, detectives were able to link the crimes through DNA, finally identifying the faceless monster responsible for their deaths. Diane Alquitz, 19, was killed in 1966, and Terry Lee Erdman, 15, lost his life in 1971. Both were taken mercilessly from their families, just 5 years apart and only 2 miles from each other. Many years later, the truth was unearthed, literally, when authorities exhumed the killer's remains to collect DNA. Diane Alkiewicz, the fourth child of a Catholic family with 6 children, was born in 1947 in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. The bustling household was located on Hayes Avenue, just a block from St. Mary Catholic Church, where they attended services. Diane was cherished by her older siblings, Dennis, Edward, and Nancy, and equally loved by her younger sisters, Patty and Debbie. Diane was the epitome of a middle child, loving, caring, and always looking out for others. She was sensitive yet outgoing, always eager to be social and involved. Tall and slender, with dark brown hair and a quick sense of humor, Diane's bright smile was her trademark. By the time she graduated high school, she had blossomed into a graceful, charming young woman. Regular visits to St. Mary's Church were a part of her life, offering her peace and guidance. Whenever she encountered difficulties or doubts, Diane found solace in prayer, relying on her faith for comfort. When it came to relationships, she was sincere and genuine. Though she dated casually in high school and had a few steady boyfriends, it wasn't until after graduation that she met someone who sparked a deeper connection. Her romance with Donald Heilmeyer from Milwaukee eventually led to an engagement. As she transitioned into adulthood, Diane chose a path that was typical for many young women of that time, full of hope and ambition. Securing a secretarial position at Kenworth Manufacturing, she had a diligent work ethic. After a year of employment, Diane felt ready to take the next step in her journey. It was time to fly the coop, so to speak. With her brother Edward's girlfriend as her roommate, Diane moved into her own apartment on Hoyt Drive. Amidst the changes and milestones in her life, Diane stood by her dear friend Diane Zimmer, as she chose another path and got married. Zimmer and Diane had been in the same school since elementary school, but became best friends in freshman year. Serving as maid of honor at Zimmer's wedding, who married her longtime high school sweetheart, marked yet another chapter in their shared history. Her fiancé, Donald Hurlmeyer, attended as her plus one. Shortly after, Donald left for basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, as he had been drafted into the Army. Diane felt a deep sense of loneliness without him by her side. To fill the void left by his absence, she sought out activities to occupy her time and distract her from the ache in her heart. In the evenings, Diane enrolled in swimming and knitting classes, embracing the opportunity to learn new skills and engage in social interactions. Additionally, she took on a part-time job as a hostess at the local Dutchland dairy restaurant, eagerly immersing herself in the bustling atmosphere to pass the hours. On November 3, 1966, Diane went about her day as usual. Patty, her younger sister, vividly recalls reaching out to Diane in hopes of borrowing a blue mohair sweater for a sleepover plan that night. Without hesitation, Diane generously agreed, promising to leave the sweater outside her apartment door for Patty to collect. Diane worked at 13700 block of West Silver Spring Drive at the metal stamping plant of Kenworth Manufacturing Company. By now, she had worked at the company for a year and a half, marking 18 months with them. She was dedicated. That day, the building was busy with activity as 25 factory workers carried out their weekend shifts, which concluded promptly at 3:30 p.m. Amidst the industrious setting, Diane stood out as the sole secretary. She was responsible for managing communications and coordinating deliveries. After the factory workers left for the day, Diane remained behind, working away at her desk until 4:30 p.m. Her duties extended beyond the typical work hours as she dutifully fielded phone calls and accepted late deliveries. Following her shift, Diane would typically rendezvous with her best friend Zimmer at her nearby workplace. Together, they would head home, sharing laughter and companionship along the way. However, that day something was definitely off. Diane was unusually late in picking up Zimmer, worrying for those who knew her well. In response, Zimmer accepted a ride with her employer's wife, who offered to take her to Kenworth to investigate. Upon arriving at the factory, they were confused. Diane's car sat in the parking lot, seemingly undisturbed. Peering through the window into the plant, they spotted Diane's purse resting on a desk and her coat hanging near the closet. Yet Diane herself was nowhere to be found. To add to the mystery, all the doors were securely locked, leaving no clues as to Diane's whereabouts. Maybe she was in the bathroom. Dennis, her brother, worked in the plant next door, so Zimmer and the boss's wife walked over to him. The trio returned just in time for the supervisor to show up for some after-hour tasks. He came to unlock the shipping room around 5:20 p.m., and that is when they saw all the blood. 20 feet from the door was the lifeless body of Diane, face down on the floor in her own blood. She had been stabbed so many times. Her knit dress was pulled up around her legs and hanging loosely off her shoulders, but her underwear remained untouched. At first, the officers believed there had been no sexual assault. There were no signs of violence or aggression in her private areas, but the medical examiner's report told a different story. The autopsy revealed that Diane had been stabbed 106 times with a knife, likely with a 3-inch blade featuring one sharp, serrated edge. The wounds ranged from half an inch to 3/4 of an inch wide, with depths of 2 to 3 inches. It was clear that Diane had fought back, as there were defensive wounds on her arms and the backs of her hands. Her nose had been broken, and there were 30 stab wounds to her head, neck, and face. Additionally, 35 stab wounds were found in rows along her back, where she had been repeatedly stabbed while lying on her stomach. Diane's brutal murder rocked the once peaceful village of Menominee Falls, leaving its residents stunned and horrified. Such a violent act was unprecedented in the village's history. It was the first recorded slaying in the serene community at the northwestern city limits of Milwaukee. Just months prior to Diane's untimely tragedy, the slaying of a 10-year-old girl in Milwaukee had cast a shadow of fear of the region. Debbie, her younger sister, was scared because the girl was so close to Debbie in age. But Diane, with a reassuring smile, had said, "We are fine. We live in Menominee Falls." In the aftermath of Diane's attack, the town changed forever. Fear gripped the hearts of residents. They bought guard dogs, chain locks, and firearms as they struggled with the new feeling of vulnerability in their once safe town. At Diane's funeral mass held at St. Mary's, grief hung heavy in the air as 250 mourners, including her devastated fiancé Donald Hillemeyer, gathered to bid farewell. Donald, granted emergency leave from basic training, was still reeling from the shock of the tragic loss. In an attempt to catch the perpetrator as soon as possible, Diane's friends, family, and acquaintances were questioned on the night her body was recovered. Patrolman Dan Schroem's first year as a police officer started off with something huge. He was assigned to remain at the site of the crime to overlook comings and goings. As spooked as he was, there was nothing to fear. Nobody came to look at things again. He would retire as a captain 26 years later, but nothing could match the horrors of the Diane Oldridge case. The investigation into Diane's slaying unfolded to give a better picture of the events leading to her tragic demise. Police surmised that the assailant ambushed Diane as she prepared to lock up and leave for the day, catching her off guard when she was all alone after hours. Their suspicions deepened as they contemplated the intruder's familiarity with the layout of the plan. It suggested that there was planning involved in targeting Diane. Then Chief of the Menominee Falls Police Department, Charles Kuhn, offered a sobering deduction, saying that Diane's assailant was not a faceless stranger, but rather someone she knew. This unsettling revelation cast a shadow of suspicion over friends, acquaintances, and associates, heightening the sense of unease within the tight-knit community. A team of dedicated detectives committed themselves to working day and night. The 7 detectives worked tirelessly through grueling 12 to 16-hour shifts without rest. Over 100 crucial pieces of evidence, including fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene and Diane's blood-stained garments, were meticulously cataloged and dispatched to the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. In the ensuing weeks, law enforcement officers interrogated all possible leads. They conducted over 500 interviews in search of the truth. Despite their exhaustive efforts, their pursuit was fruitless. Initially, 6 people were marked as potential suspects, each with solid alibis firmly in place. Diane's family and close confidants steered investigators towards a troubling figure lurking at her workplace. The son of her boss, whose persistent advances had made her incredibly uncomfortable. She was almost afraid of him. Recounting Diane's hesitance, her sister Patty vividly recalled her distressing encounters with the unwanted suitor. He knew she was committed, but that did not stop him. Yet even as suspicion swirled around the employer's son, he had a steadfast alibi, corroborated by family members. As the trail of leads grew cold and the promise of breakthroughs faded, the investigation lost its momentum. With each passing day, Diane's unsolved case went cold. Donald Hillemeyer, her fiancé, returned to basic training heartbroken with questions that would never be answered. Diane's parents both passed young, their health deteriorating under the strain of their daughter's slaying. Her mother, Irene, had been diagnosed with diabetes shortly before the terrible night she lost her daughter. She passed away of congestive heart failure at 50 years old in 1973. One would say she could not bear losing her daughter. Her father, Robert, suffered a heart attack at 55, 3 years later. Diane's eldest sister, Nancy, passed at 58, and her brother, Dennis, who tirelessly pursued justice for Diane, suffered a stroke at 50, and he too was lost 12 years later. In 1966, Menominee Falls Police sent a questionnaire to delivery companies that had contacts with Kenworth. Company records show that your company makes deliveries here, and we request your cooperation in answering the following questions and returning this paper to our department immediately. Your cooperation will be of vital assistance in solving this crime. One company responded, saying the man picked something up from Kenworth 4 days before the tragedy. The man would have been familiar with the scene of the Diane Ulquitz case. It is unclear whether this lead was pursued. In the 1990s, DNA technology raised hopes for solving Diane's case. Despite entering evidence into Cody's and pursuing suspects for DNA samples, no matches were found. The prime suspect, the employer's son, had passed away in 1991, and his cremated remains could not provide a sample. Initially, detectives believed this was a position that offers no hope of progress. While the case remained open, it was simply a formality. But they did not realize the assailant was lurking nearby, looking for new prey. Terry Lee Erdman was described as a quiet, reserved girl with a great sense of humor. The middle child of 3 siblings, she had 2 brothers, Daryl and Daniel. But being the only daughter in the family, she got extra attention from her parents. Terry's father worked as a switchman for the Milwaukee Road. Their life was comfortable. Her mother, Lois Mae Christian, was employed in fabric stores and J.C. Penney's. She often went bowling with her husband in couples leagues. The family loved spending time together at their cottage in Tomahawk, Wisconsin. Terry had a loving family. The 15-year-old had just finished 9th grade at Samuel Morse Junior High School. She was going to enroll in James Madison High School during fall and September of 1971. On Wednesday, 23rd June 1971, she left home somewhere around 5 p.m. She was going to babysit in the neighborhood. She typically left a note when she went out, and it was usually on a Wednesday. But this time, she didn't. Her family thought it was just an oversight. However, by 9:30 p.m., their concern grew. They checked with neighbors and made calls, but no one had seen her. Earlier in the day, she had spent time with friends near North 95th and West Rio Streets, enjoying laughs and conversation until the sky turned purple. Harry decided to head home, choosing the familiar shortcut through the open field, a path she knew well that saved a few minutes on her walk to their house on the 10400 block of West Silver Spring Drive. That was the last time anyone knew of her whereabouts. The following day, 11-year-old Robert Sonier was walking in the woods behind the Moore Way department store on the 10100 block of West Appleton Avenue with his father, Walter. This particular area of woods was called Lover's Lane as it was secluded, and teen couples often parked their cars there to get intimate as suggested by the name. As they walked through the dense bushes, Robert saw something odd. It looked like a person lying on the ground in the thicket of trees and small grass. He first thought perhaps it was a couple, but then noticed it was a girl all alone. He realized it was a lifeless body of a girl. The 15-year-old was stabbed over 60 times. Her arms were tied with twine. Her blue shorts and underwear had been pulled down, and her jersey sweater was pulled over her face, suggesting she had been assaulted. According to Officer Robert Schultz, she had been stabbed aggressively. Late that night, around 12:30 a.m., her father was brought in to identify her body at the county morgue. Terry's 1971 case is the 3rd oldest unsolved case at the Milwaukee Police Department. Police exhausted all possible leads, and nothing could be said about whether or not she would get justice. Her family was never the same again. In February 2011, DNA was taken from Terry's autopsy, and it was identified as male DNA. Detectives suspected the same person committed both of the slayings of Diane and Terry due to case similarities. Firstly, the distance between the cases. It happened around 1.5 miles from each other. Also, both victims were teenage girls, so it did match the profile he must have set in his mind for the ideal victim. Both of them were stabbed. It was highly aggressive, as if in a frenzy, even as the life had drained from the body. Lastly, there was evidence of intimate assault, which provided a motive for such a heinous crime. A joint request was placed at the Wisconsin Crime Lab to compare the DNA profiles to each other. The Wisconsin Crime Lab then confirmed that the DNA profiles from both victims were consistent. The DNA could not be matched to a suspect, so the case went cold again. In February, Menominee Falls Detective Chris Bellows met with the staff of the State of Wisconsin Crime Laboratory about the use of forensic investigative genetic genealogy, which had been developed in February 2019. Then in February, through investigative efforts that utilized forensic investigative genetic genealogy, a potential suspect was identified. Clarence Tappendorf was a delivery driver in 1966 for Claremont Transfer Company, whose route included Kenworth. There were no deliveries scheduled on the date of Diane's demise. 4 days before her slaying, he picked up a delivery according to the questionnaires Menominee Falls PD had given out during the initial investigation. He would have basic knowledge of the layout of the building and the fact that Diane would be alone 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. On the day Diane lost her life, Tappendorf made a delivery to a location across the street from Kenworth Company. Tappendorf, a man whose life spanned 80 years, had already passed away on January 6, 2008. Investigators reached out to the late Tappendorf's 2 adult sons, and one of them agreed to provide a DNA sample. They compared his DNA to the profiles from both cases and discovered that the DNA found on Diane Alkowitz's clothing likely belonged to Tappendorf, their father. Police then obtained a search warrant to exhume Tappendorf's body from Holy Cross Cemetery in Milwaukee to collect DNA samples for further analysis. Tappendorf was a devoted husband to Joyce for 57 years, a loving father to 6 children, a grandfather to 6 grandchildren, and a great-grandfather to many. Despite his picture-perfect family life, he was confirmed as a match for the perpetrator's DNA in October 2023. At the time Diane's life was taken, he would have been 39 years old, and 44 when he attacked young Terry Lee. This revelation raises many questions, especially when considering the tragic event that later befell him. At the age of 17, Tappendorf experienced the heartbreaking loss of his own daughter. Hattie Jo Tappendorf, his daughter, was found beaten to death on a sidewalk near her home on August 1, 1975, just 2 blocks away. This occurred 4 years after Tappendorf's last known attack. The perpetrator, Roy Clark O'Neill, an 18-year-old, was identified when his parents turned him in after recognizing a watch from a television report about the crime scene. The suspect told authorities that he had taken LSD and had been drinking. He was convicted of second-degree slaying and sentenced to 38 years in prison. Then, Tappendorf's son passed away in 1987. His wife, Joyce, had to face the unbearable pain of losing a child to a violent fate all over again. On Friday, May 22, 1987, their 34-year-old son, Mark, took his own life in what police determined to be a slaying. Mark shot his wife, Linda, 34, in the head with a hunting rifle before turning the weapon on himself early Friday morning in their South Side home. The bodies were discovered by their 15-year-old daughter around 7 a.m. The couple's daughter and son had slept through the ordeal. Joyce reflected on the tragedy, struggling to comprehend why such sorrow had struck her family again. She described her son as a deeply troubled person, unable to understand why he had also taken Linda's life. But this could offer another explanation. Perhaps there was an undiagnosed illness, a mental illness for both the father and the son. Debbie Cagliari, Diane's sister, thanked the detectives for their hard work and dedication to solve Diane's case. Debbie was only 9 when her niece even appeared for an interview. She said the following to families of other cold case victims: "Do not give up. Do not give up. You cannot give up hope. You have to keep it going." Norman Gross, a former classmate of Diane's, said he never gave up hope that her perpetrator would eventually be revealed. Just going to class reunions and stuff, her name was always there. She is always on your mind. All these years, and finally it has come to a conclusion. Attorney General Josh Cole expressed his sadness that the individual responsible for the crimes could not be brought to justice during his lifetime. However, he acknowledged the tireless efforts of investigators and scientists who worked relentlessly to identify the perpetrator, bringing some form of closure to the case. Chief Jeffrey Norman added, "I know there are families out there wondering about their cases. There is no statute of limitations on a murder investigation. Whether it's 5, 10, or 70 years, we are committed to bringing closure and resolution to these heinous crimes." Despite the years of pain and loss, the truth eventually came to light, allowing the victims' families to begin the long process of healing. While some may feel that Clarence Tappendorf got away with it, his life seems to have been marked by an eerie sense of suffering. At least with the help of DNA and genetic genealogy, the victims' families were finally able to gain some answers about the horrific crimes. As for the why, that answer remains buried with Clarence Tappendorf. Investigators are now exploring the possibility that he may be responsible for other unsolved crimes. Moving on to the next case.